You know, we all think we know the story of Beauty and the Beast, right? The cursed prince, the bookish girl, that whole magical rose thing. But what if I told you the tale we know is just the final polished chapter? The real story, the one that's been kind of hidden for centuries. Well, that's what we're diving into today.
So, if you've been on the internet lately, you've probably seen this meme, or some version of it. It paints this really powerful picture. A beautiful, sophisticated Moorish woman from a thriving African civilization, and this beastly, hairy European man from a continent that was frankly falling apart. It feels like this incredible reversal of the story we've always been told. But the big question is it actually true?
Okay, let's just get it right out of the way. The short, simple, and direct answer is no. That specific story, set up just like that in the 1300s, it never happened.
But wait, don't click away, because the truth behind that myth, the actual origin of all these ideas, is so much more complicated and honestly way more fascinating than any viral post.
So what is going on here? Well, the internet did what the internet does best. It basically took two completely different stories from two totally different centuries and just kind of mashed them together into one. Our first job is to pull them apart.
Okay, so here's where it all gets tangled up. On one hand, you have the fairy tale we all recognize. That was a piece of fiction written down in France in the 1740s. But then, 200 years before that, in the 1500s, you have a real couple, Petrus Gonsalves and his wife, Catherine. Now, Petrus had a very real medical condition called hypertrichosis, which, caused a lot of hair to grow all over his body. Their tragic life in the royal courts might have inspired some themes in the later story, for sure, but they are absolutely not the couple from that viral meme.
So let's just break it down. The viral myth gets pretty much everything wrong. Catherine, the real wife, she wasn't Moorish. They lived in the 1500s, not the 1300s. And the fairy tale we know wasn't even written until the 1700s. And this is the big one. There is absolutely zero historical proof, no manuscript of that Moorish beauty story. It just doesn't exist.
Okay, so, meme debunked. But that leaves us with a much, much deeper question. If the story isn't about Petrus Gonsalves and a Moorish woman, then where did this powerful idea, this archetype of a beastly European man, actually come from? Well, the answer takes us right back to the very era the myth got wrong, the 1300s.
To really get to the origin of the beast archetype, you have to understand what the world actually looked like back in the 14th century. And let me tell you, it was a tale of two very, very different worlds.
You really have to forget the fairy tale version of history. In the 1300s, West African empires like the Mali Empire were absolute powerhouses, centers of incredible wealth, learning, and trade. Meanwhile, Europe was in a state of near total collapse. We're talking catastrophic famine, constant war, and then the Black Death, which wiped out almost half the population. The global power dynamic was the complete opposite of what we usually assume. So, when travelers and scholars from these sophisticated Moorish and African cultures looked north towards Europe, what did they see? And maybe more importantly, how did they write about it? I mean, just look at this quote from the historian al-Masudi all the way back in the 10th century. He's describing early Northern Europeans, and he is blunt. He says, "Their manners are like beasts."
And that wasn't just a one-off comment either. 400 years later, the legendary scholar Ibn Khaldun basically said the same thing. He actually came up with a theory that the harsh, cold climate was what made Northern Europeans hairier, rougher, and, in his words, closer to savagery than to civilization. From their point of view, Europeans were the primitive ones.
The main word these scholars used for Western Europeans was Al-Farange, or the Franks. Over time, it kind of became this catch-all term for all those pale, hairy northern tribes who, from the perspective of the world's centers of civilization, seemed pretty wild. This is the real historical root of the beast archetype.
Okay, so we've got this historical archetype, the hairy, beast-like northerner, seen through the eyes of a more advanced southern culture. How on earth does that get flipped around into a European fairy tale about a cursed prince? Well, the answer lies in a technological revolution.
The year is 1455. Johannes Gutenberg prints his famous Bible using movable type. And right there, in that moment, the power to control the story of history starts to shift dramatically. Because suddenly, whoever controls the printing press gets to write down the official version of every story.
So you can practically trace the journey. It likely starts as an oral tradition in Africa and the Moorish world, stories about civilizing these wild northern men. Then through centuries of trade and contact, these ideas filter into Europe.
But once Europeans get the printing press, they can start writing down their own versions of these tales, changing them and claiming them. And by the time we get to the 1700s, the process is complete. The story is fully whitewashed to fit a European worldview.
And look, this isn't just some wild theory. It's a well-documented historical pattern. We see the exact same thing happen with other stories we think we know. Aladdin was originally a Syrian story before a French writer adapted it. Sinbad the Sailor was African, but his skin got progressively lighter in European illustrations. It even happened to real people, like the Black Roman saint, Saint Maurice, who was later painted as white.
So what does all this mean? What's the big takeaway here? It's that history isn't just about what happened. It's about who gets to tell the story. And for a very long time, that story was told by the people who owned the printing presses.
This timeline really puts it all together. For centuries, you have Moorish scholars describing Europeans as beast-like. Then boom, 1455, the printing press arrives and shifts who controls the narrative. A bit later, in the 1500s, the real-life story of Petrus Gonsalves adds another layer of inspiration. And finally, by 1740, all those threads get woven together into the completely Europeanized tale we know today.
So here's the bottom line. The beast wasn't originally some magical monster under a curse. He was an archetype. He was a cultural memory of how the civilized, flourishing African and Moorish worlds once saw the so-called barbarians to their north, a memory that was eventually flipped, rewritten, and sold back to the world as a European fairy tale.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a story as famous as Beauty and the Beast has this deep, hidden, and totally inverted history, what other stories sitting on our bookshelves have origins we've never even thought to question?